Welcome, welcome, welcome. So way back when people wanted to question global warming, there was a lot of it's not warming, or it stopped in 1998, or even it's cooling. But as the planet continued to warm, that line of argument became more and more ridiculous. And so everybody seemingly moved to a new talking point that they have been faithfully repeating again and again and again.
I think the climate always changes, I guess is what I should say.
The climate has always changed.
Climate changes. It's always changed.
Who denies climate change? It's always changing.
The climate is always changing.
Climate changes. It always has. It always will.
I mean, the climate has always changed, right?
The climate has always changed.
Climate has always changed.
The climate has always changed.
The climate has always changed.
Climate's always changed.
Climate has always changed.
Do you believe that
the climate has always changed?
The climate has always changed.
The climate is changing. It's always changing.
The climate has always been changing.
The climate has always been changing.
The climate has always changed.
Climate is changing. It has always changed, by the way.
The climate has always changed.
The climate has been changing from the dawn of time.
The climate has been changing for millions and billions of years.
When has the climate not changed?
Yeah, the climate's always changing over certain periods of time.
The climate has always changed. God's in control of the climate.
All right, that last one was just for fun. That was amazing though, right? So many free-thinking, independent-minded, bold skeptics. It's inspiring. I'm inspired. But I mean, I really can't blame them. I mean, it might be the perfect talking point. Seriously, it is a masterclass in propaganda, and I tip my hat to it. Think about it. What does it do? It lets you, talking head on TV, say something that is technically true.
The climate has always changed.
And on at least some time scale, you are not lying, right? Because what you do instead, you let your listener fill in the other parts, the lie parts, in their head. You only said the true part. But see, this is why context matters, right? If I am a biology teacher and I'm teaching my class that lung cancer has existed for millions of years, right? It existed before people existed. Mice had lung cancer. It has always been around. That's fine, right? I'm educating a younger generation who might not have thought about it before. But if I am big tobacco executive and I'm asked on TV about the link between my product and lung cancer, and I answer with, lung cancer has always existed. It's pretty fucking different, doesn't it? I mean, technically, what big tobacco said is true. But the word technically is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, isn't it? I mean, yeah, if you're going to go back hundreds of millions of years, of course you can find a lot of changes and periods that were much warmer than today. This is why it's a total straw man argument, first of all. Yeah, pretty childish, but whatever. By the way, I always say if you're going to go back like 500 million years, why stop there? Just go back all the way. If you go back 4.5 billion years, the Earth was like 3,000 degrees. Put that on a chart. Look how much cooling. But of course, you don't even need to go back hundreds of millions of years to see climate change. You can see it over the past 500,000 years, for example. We have ice cores. And no, I'm not talking about CO2 correlation here. Actually, just delete that. We're just looking at temperatures. And because of ice cores, we know that Earth has gone through cycles. Glacial and interglacial periods. They've happened for about the last million years. And you can see about every 100,000 years, we have an interglacial period punctuated by mostly ice age, what we would call ice age temperatures. These temperature swings, of course, are initiated by natural variations in the Earth's orbit called Milankovitch cycles. I don't think anybody's really disputing that. At least I haven't seen anybody dispute it. And if we can agree that these climate changes indeed existed, and I think we should all be able to agree to that, exactly, we should be able to see that instead of a warming trend, we are actually on the track for a cooling trend according to these cycles. Here's a paper for that if you want, but I think it should be obvious enough just by the simple fact that we are currently near the top of this chart, not the bottom. We've already done the warming part of the cycle. That was like 8,000 years ago. Now we're on the cooling part. But as we can also see from these charts, these Milankovitch cycles happen over hundreds of thousands of years. The warming trend that we're talking about, the only one that anybody except a few nerdy geologists ever gives a shit about, which is the one that has happened since the 20th century, presumably happens on a centuries level timescale. So if we go back centuries instead of millions or thousands of years, we should be able to see this kind of century cycle. If the warming that we are seeing is part of a natural cycle that happens on a centuries timescale, we should be able to go back many centuries and see similar warming trends, right? This is what climate always changed should mean if they are saying it in response to the warming trend that we are seeing since the 20th century, which again is the only one we care about. Except if we do go back many centuries, we see that the planet has actually been remarkably stable. For example, take this graph going back 1,000 years. And yes, I absolutely included this graph specifically to trigger and piss off the contrarians. This graph is famously known as the hockey stick. It was first published in 1999 by Michael Mann. There's another free trigger for them there. And I also include it because in spite of all the controversy that has been attempted to be drummed up about it, it has actually held its overall message and shape quite well in the face of many other additional analyses. Many studies, in fact, have confirmed the overall shape of Man 99, but there's one I want to highlight in particular, the Pages 2K group. They released studies in 2013 and 2019. You could say if Mann's 1999 paper was Mendel crossbreeding peas and drawing a Punnett square, Pages 2K was the fucking Human Genome Project. 80 different collaborators, 60 different institutions from around the world, experts in each of their own specialized regions and proxy methods, all coming together, 6 continents, the Arctic, ocean basins, looking at ice cores, pollen, lake sediments, corals, tree rings, instrumental data, ocean sediments, and stalagmites. Every possible way you could think to track changes in the Earth's geological record is in there. And they found over the last 2,000 years, remember, Man 99 was only 1,000 years. For 2,000 years, 20 centuries, the Earth was in a stable, let's call it 10 mile an hour, sluggish, cooling trend that abruptly reversed and went 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction. If climate always changes, implying that what we are seeing today is normal, then for at least the last 2,000 years, the Earth did not get that message. As I mentioned, it wasn't just a Pages study. A lot of studies have found this and seen this basic overall trend that the Earth was slowly cooling in accordance of what we would expect from the Milankovitch cycles, and then abruptly around the 20th century, reversing and accelerating in the opposite direction. For example, this study, when compared with recent temperature changes, our reanalysis indicates that both the rate and magnitude of modern warming are unusual relative to the changes of the past 24,000 years. Yes, 24,000 years. Also here, 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 and here. Now, I would hope that most would agree that looking at this reversal, it demands some explanation, right? Least of all because the climate cannot simply change by itself. Like everything else in the universe, the Earth obeys the conservation of energy, and to increase its average temperature means to increase its energy. And the only way to do that, you either increase the energy coming in or reduce the flow of energy going out, like a bathtub with a faucet and a drain. For example, a very natural idea is to ask if maybe the sun is getting stronger. You might also see this with sudden changes in average cloud cover. Clouds reflect sunlight. Fewer clouds would mean more light and energy hitting the surface, right? Those would be examples of incoming energy increasing, at least if your boundary condition is just above the surface. Another possible explanation can be a strengthening greenhouse effect, absorbing energy from the surface that would have gone to space and re-emitting it back down to the surface again. This would be an example of a technically temporary reduction in outgoing energy. Now, by itself, the fact that this warming trend happened to coincide with the Industrial Revolution and the widespread burning of fossil fuels on a global scale, completely transforming the planet, releasing unfathomable amounts of previously locked away carbon in the form of CO2, a gas which is absolutely known to absorb infrared radiation, a fact that is demonstrated and used in spectroscopy and chemical manufacturing. This is not proof, on its own at least, to conclude that the warming is due to said greenhouse gases, namely CO2. Although I really think any unbiased, reasonable person should at least suspect it. But anyway, we can and have done better than just suspecting. So let's look at the evidence that we do have that this warming trend absolutely is a result of greenhouse gases. And by the way, everything that I'm about to show, every single paper I cite, is based on observational evidence only. Real world measurements. I am not showing you models. I am not showing you predictions. I'm not showing you speculation or appeals to consensus. Just real world observational evidence. And very briefly, we're going to start out just because I think it's hard to question now, right? Even our friends acknowledge the planet is indeed warming. We have temperature data sets, including satellite data sets that all agree. We have ice extent decreasing, sea levels rising. The planet is clearly warming. There's a reason they all changed their tune to "it's always changing," because the warming is now just undeniable. So let's just move on, and we're going to look at the fingerprints of why we know that this warming is caused by a strengthening greenhouse gas specifically. First fingerprint, upper atmospheric cooling. So the greenhouse effect mainly works in the lower atmosphere or troposphere. The result of that is a cooling upper atmosphere, stratosphere and above. The signature is unique to a greenhouse effect induced warming, and indeed we have measured this cooling of the upper atmosphere. We can see this paper here. Here's another one here, and another one here, and here are 14 more. Pretty well documented. Next fingerprint, diurnal temperature range. This is simply the difference between the hottest and coldest part of the day. The greenhouse effect works 24/7, while a solar incoming based warming would work only during the day. Therefore, we expect a greenhouse effect induced warming to warm the Earth at night faster than it warms in the daytime. Put another way, the difference between the hottest and coldest part of the day should shrink. And indeed, this is exactly what we see. That graph was from this paper here. And here's another one. And another one. And here are 23 more. The case is getting stronger. And again, these are all observational studies, not models, not predictions, just measurements. And finally, we have satellite and ground-based measurements of infrared radiation at the wavelengths that CO2 and other greenhouse gases are known to interact with, and we have seen, for example, decreasing outgoing radiation and increasing downwelling from the troposphere, from the greenhouse gases, directly. For example, the results indicate that over the period 1964 to 1990, there has been a global increase in the clear sky long-wave flux at the surface. This global trend is approximately 1.7 watts per meter squared per decade. Here's another paper. Here's another. Here's another. Here's another. Here's another. Here's another. And here's another. I'd just like to emphasize, those studies mean we can literally fucking see the greenhouse effect. We can see it getting stronger. And if that's not smoking gun level of evidence to you, like I literally don't even know what would be. And so the last natural piece, you may say, fine, the warming is caused by an increased greenhouse effect. How do we know that the increased greenhouse effect is caused by human activities or the rise in CO2? First of all, you can simply look outside and see how much CO2 is actually being emitted. You can do a bottom-up approach of all the factories, power plants, cars, planes, everything, and just count how much CO2 has been emitted and the associated rise in CO2 that we would expect. And unsurprisingly, we emit more than enough CO2 to completely explain the rise in CO2 concentrations that we've seen. But we can do even better than that. So CO2 naturally exists in different forms. The most common two are carbon-12 and carbon-13 based CO2. Plants, it happens, have a preference for carbon-12. Fossil fuels originally came from plants, So we would expect that if the carbon came from fossil fuels, the carbon-12 proportion would be increasing. Volcanoes, on the other hand, just churn up whatever's under them and belch out the CO2 indiscriminately. But because plants have a clear preference for carbon-12 with photosynthesis, the combustion of fossil fuels from those fossilized plants has measurably changed the ratio of carbon-12 to 13 in the atmosphere. The relative fraction of carbon-13 is decreasing. And finally, combustion, of course, requires oxygen, or O2. If we are burning carbon to create CO2, that means we are taking O2 out of the atmosphere. So if the rise in CO2 is due to combustion, we should see a decrease in atmospheric oxygen. And again, this is exactly what we measure. So, in summary, we have the sudden, inexplicable reversal of a 2,000-year trend. We have the perfect correlation between CO2 and temperatures over this warming trend. We have multiple independent lines of evidence that the rise in CO2 is indeed man-made. We have multiple fingerprints that the warming that we see is specifically due to a greenhouse gas induced warming, upper atmospheric cooling, and a decreasing diurnal temperature range. And finally, we can literally see the greenhouse effect getting stronger. I know you've probably seen 97% of climatologists agree that human activities are warming the planet. I hope this gives you a better idea of why so many have come to that conclusion. At least in my opinion, that sufficiently explains it. There's a stack of evidence and it's convincing. That's it. That's all you need. But okay, yes, there could be an alternate argument that government, which government? I guess all of them, they all want to extend their power. And instead of just doing that, governments from like 100 countries came together and agreed unanimously, as they so often do, that instead of just using any of the dozens of real problems as an excuse for more power, like crime or drugs or air pollution or something, they figured that since government employees are famously so competent, it would be easier to fabricate a completely false one. And they did this, by the way, by coercing thousands of real scientists to help them, convincing them to throw away what may have otherwise been a meaningful and interesting career studying real aspects of their chosen fields like climatology, geology, or physics, and instead spend 4 decades as nothing more than a robot working night and day to manufacture one completely fake piece of evidence after another. Hundreds of thousands of worthless journal pages, trillions of fake data points on every aspect of the climate system, a truly monumental effort to convince people that a non-existent problem actually exists. Efforts that have apparently been successful, by the way, with most people believing now that the problem is in fact real. They have succeeded. And the reward for the success? Most people still considering it a pretty boring issue and barely thinking about it. But maybe some of them will vote a little differently sometimes because of it and inadvertently give their government a little more power. Bravo, I guess. You could believe that too. Just a reminder, the people who believe the story on the left call themselves skeptics. Isn't that cute? Skeptics. You know, people who do not easily believe ridiculous things. I think the last point I want to make, this talking point often goes together with another one. It's either implied or stated outright. If the climate changed before and it didn't destroy the planet, it won't destroy the planet now, right? We've all heard some variant of that, which, is not only a ridiculous straw man, it's just ridiculous logic. Since when is the bar that we have set to care about a problem being that problem must be capable of destroying the planet, whatever that even means? Like, look at every other problem that gets taken seriously in the news. Poverty, violent crime, disease, addictions, war, corruption. Are any of these things capable of destroying the planet? Why are intelligent people buying into this argument? Like, if something is incapable of destroying the planet, it's therefore nothing to worry about. What the fuck kind of black-white binary logic is that? Climate change is a problem. It's already a problem. and it has the potential to become a serious problem, among other serious problems that we will have. And this is kind of the point. It is an extra, unnecessary, unneeded, additional problem that we as a species will have to contend with. We certainly will have no shortage of other problems to deal with as well. A worst case scenario from climate change. We have positive feedbacks, ice albedo, and methane clathrates. This could result in 4 to 5 degrees of additional warming. That's as big of a swing, by the way, as the difference between now and the last glacial maximum, what we in common language call the Ice Age, with mammoths and sea levels hundreds of feet lower and ice sheets 2 miles thick going down to New York. Thick as in height. Yeah, all the way down to New York City. The world was a completely different place. And we are talking about a change of the same magnitude, just in the opposite direction. And of course, this change does not happen overnight. It is an ongoing change, a change that constantly changes, that we are playing a game of chase to catch up with. If we were already 4 degrees warmer, that would be fine. The problem is global warming, not global warmed. It's not that this is the perfect temperature. The answer to what is the ideal climate is always the same. This one, right? This is the climate where we have laid our coastal cities, where we have our farmlands and our borders. It has been remarkably stable for at least 2,000 years, probably as many as 8,000 years. It's likely not a coincidence that humans, having been around for 300,000 years, only established civilization and cities like 6,000 years ago. A radical shift to a completely new climate would be a very difficult problem for us as a species. This is not about polar bears. It's about people. And I'm not advocating panic. I'm not advocating drastic action that will destroy the economy. I'm simply asking for our leaders to stop with these childish bullshit word games and take the problem a little seriously, as they do every other problem.